Marcus Ellington was 39 years old the morning 12 lawyers walked through the door of the conference room his wife had rented to destroy him. She had told him that morning it was just a routine business review. She had kissed his cheek the way she always did, clean, practiced, final, and told him to wear something presentable. He had pressed his gray shirt and driven the same truck he had driven for 7 years. He clipped his badge to the pocket the way he always did, and nodded at the building security guard the way he always did. And he did not say a single word about the folder locked in the console of that truck. What Denise never thought to ask. Not in 11 years. Not once. Was whose name appeared on the acquisition documents filed quietly in Mecklenburg County 14 months before she served him with divorce papers. What happened next would cost Denise Ellington everything she thought she had already taken. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was still hot. Marcus sat at the kitchen table that Thursday morning with the mug cradled in both hands, watching the light come across the backyard through the window he had installed himself. He had cut every frame. He had caulked every edge. The morning light moved through the glass in clean, even lines, the way morning light only does when someone has set the angles right. He had a contractor's eye for angles. Always had. His grandmother had told him once, sitting on her porch in Charlotte with a glass of sweet tea sweating in her hand, "Marcus, the man who builds the house decides how the light comes in." He had been 11 years old. He had not known yet what that meant, but he had carried it the way you carry things you don't understand until one morning they make perfect sense. He had built or renovated most of what was in this house. The kitchen cabinets, walnut-faced and fitted without gaps. The deck out back that stretched 12 feet and held the weight of every summer gathering they had ever hosted. The credenza in the hallway that he was currently sanding on weekends. Slow, patient work. The kind of work that asked nothing of you except that you show up for it. He was a project manager by title. Senior project manager, to be specific, at one of the largest commercial construction firms in the Charlotte metro. He had held that title for 6 years. What the title did not say, what it did not need to say, was that Marcus Ellington had also spent the last 3 years building something on the side. Quietly, methodically, the way he did everything. His second phone, sleeker, newer, company issued by the holding company that did not appear on any document connected to his name, stayed in the inside pocket of his jacket, where it had always been, unknown to her. He had met Denise at a fundraiser 11 years ago, a benefit dinner for a youth trades program he had helped organize through his church. She had been in marketing then, sharp and compelling, in a green dress that caught the light and a laugh that filled the room. He had been the guy in the corner talking to the teenagers about load-bearing walls. She had walked over and asked him what he was explaining with such focus. He had said, how not to build something that falls. She had smiled. She had stayed. He had believed, for a long time, that was the beginning of something that would last. That morning, he noticed she had a new perfume, warm and unfamiliar, something with sandalwood and something else he could not name. She had not mentioned buying it. Her phone, face down on the counter, had buzzed twice while she made her coffee. She had not looked at it while he was in the room. He did not say anything. He watched. He had always been better at watching than talking. 3 weeks before that morning, an envelope had arrived at the job site addressed to him personally. No return address. A Charlotte postmark. Inside was a single page. A screenshot of a wire transfer confirmation, dated 9 months prior, moving $78,000 from their joint savings account into a personal account he had never seen. His name was not on the receiving account. Hers was not either. The name on the receiving account was Garrett Leith. He had slid the page back into the envelope and placed it under the passenger seat of his truck without a word to anyone. He had carried it there for 3 weeks while he watched and waited and learned. He had confirmed Garrett Leith's name in less than 4 hours, not through confrontation, not by asking Denise a single question. He confirmed it the same way he confirmed anything at a job site when numbers didn't add up. He went back to the source material. The joint account statements were accessible online. He had never looked at them with the specific attention he gave them that Thursday evening, sitting in his truck in the parking lot of the grocery store down the street, Denise thinking he had gone for olive oil. He scrolled back 22 months. The pattern emerged the way patterns always did once you knew what to look for. Steady, incremental withdrawals, never more than $4,000 at a time, always on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, always to external transfers. 61 transactions over 22 months. He added them on the calculator on his phone. The total was $187,000 and some change. His hands did not shake. He put the phone down on the seat beside him and looked at the windshield for a moment, and then he picked the phone back up and he began photographing each page of the statements. He did not stop until he had photographs of every single month. He drove home with the olive oil. He made dinner. He ate beside her and answered her questions about his day in full sentences and helped her carry the dishes to the sink. She squeezed his arm before she went to bed. He told her he would be up in a little while. He sat at the kitchen table for 2 more hours. She had also, he found on the second night of looking, changed the beneficiary designation on his $340 company life insurance policy 11 months ago. He had not signed that form. He recognized, studying the copy he had requested from HR under the pretense of a routine update, that the signature was close, but not his. He knew his signature. He had been signing construction contracts for 15 years. The loop on the second letter was wrong. It had always been wrong. Garrett Leith, he found, was Denise's college friend turned commercial real estate broker. A man who had attended their wedding, who had sat at table 7, who had clinked a glass and smiled at Marcus across the room. He had found Garrett's firm listed as the agent on a condominium in South End, purchased under an LC registered to Denise's sister's address 4 months ago. He sat with that for a long time. He was not angry in the way people imagined anger. He was clear. Clarity and anger were different things, and he had always had more use for the first. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Foundation. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person he knew would understand exactly what this required. Patricia Odoms had practiced family law in Charlotte for 26 years. She was 61, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the kind of expression that gave away nothing and took everything in. Her office was on the 14th floor, south-facing, and Charlotte spread out behind her through wide windows in all its industrious flatness. Marcus had known her since his grandmother had used her to settle the estate that left him the small parcel of land in Concord that he had never touched, and that had quietly tripled in value. Patricia had sent him a Christmas card every year since. She had attended his grandmother's funeral. She was the kind of person who kept track of the people who mattered and let the rest go, and Marcus respected that profoundly. He sat across from her in her office on a Tuesday morning and placed his folder on her desk without a word. She opened it and put on her reading glasses. She did not speak for 11 minutes. When she finished, she set the reading glasses on the desk and pressed her fingertips together and looked at him the way a doctor looks at you after they already know what the scan shows. "The signature on the beneficiary change is fraudulent," she said. Yes, the transfers constitute marital asset dissipation. All of it is recoverable. I suspected. And the LLC. She tapped the property record. This will be straightforward to Pierce. Good, she paused. She picked up the photograph of the LLC filing and set it down again. Marcus, how long have you known? Fully? 3 weeks. Some things longer than that without being certain. She looked at him over her folded hands. And you haven't said a word to her? No, she doesn't know you've seen any of this. No, she nodded slowly. Good. I need you to not say a word to her until I tell you to. Not a word, not a look, not a change in your routine. You keep living exactly as you have been living. She folded the glasses into their case. And I need you to tell me about the other matter. The Meridian matter. He told her about the other matter. She was quiet for longer this time. She turned once to look out the window at the city, and then turned back. And when she looked at him, there was something in her expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same space. The way a chess player looks at the board when the position becomes beautiful and inevitable. Real power operated in quiet rooms. 3 days passed. Marcus drove out to Concord on a Saturday morning, to his uncle Vernon's house on the edge of the old property, where Vernon had lived since Marcus was a boy. The drive took 40 minutes through the flat suburban corridor, and then into the older roads that felt like a different era, where the trees were taller, and the houses were set back from the road, and the grass needed cutting, and nobody seemed to mind. Vernon was 72, retired from 30 years in commercial plumbing, and the kind of man who listened with his whole body and spoke only when he was finished thinking. He had been at Marcus's wedding. He had not thought much of Denise from the beginning, but he had never said so, because it was not his place, and because he had learned, at some point in his 70s, that most things people needed to know they already knew and would arrive at in their own time. They sat on the porch with coffee. Marcus told him what he had found. He laid it out the way he laid out a project scope, in order, without editorializing, beginning with the envelope and ending with the LLC. Vernon sat in his chair with his big hands around his mug and listened without interrupting. A delivery truck moved slowly past on the road below. A dog down the way said something about it and then went quiet. When Marcus finished, Vernon was quiet for a long time. He watched a cardinal in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. She used your patience against you, he said finally. She figured a quiet man would keep being quiet. She figured right, for a while. Vernon nodded slowly, looking at his hands. The skin on them was worn and detailed the way 30 years of real work makes hands look, worn in a way that told you something. Your grandmother used to say something about that. About tools. He looked up. She said the finest tool in any shop is the one you don't know is there until you need it. Marcus said nothing. He did not need to write it down. Some things you hear once and carry without effort. Vernon also told him something he had not known, something he had carried without knowing its weight. He had seen Denise and a man he did not recognize standing beside a rental-looking car in a dark jacket across from the church building Marcus helped manage 14 months ago. A Thursday afternoon. He had been dropping off choir sheet music. He had noted it. He had not thought much of it. He thought of it now. By the following Wednesday, Patricia's paralegal had obtained the original application for the LLC and run the accounting. Garrett Leith had leveraged the condominium purchase as collateral for a second loan 3 months after buying it. Drawing an additional $60,000, he had routed through 2 intermediary accounts, one of which belonged to a marketing firm Denise had founded 18 months prior as a sole proprietor and never disclosed to Marcus. The firm had received 4 payments totaling $31,000 from the LLC. They had been building something, just not the right thing. The forensic accountant Patricia retained spent 6 days cross-referencing transactions and produced a 22-page report that Patricia summarized for Marcus in a single sentence. Everything they tried to hide left a clear trail. Marcus drove home that evening. He changed clothes. He sat across from Denise at dinner and asked about her week, and listened while she described a client call and a conference she was thinking of attending in March. He told her that sounded like a good idea. He cleared his own plate. He kissed her forehead before he went to the workshop. Some things you don't say out loud. You just document them. There was one more thing. Patricia had called him the previous Friday with a piece of information that required no response, no strategy session, no adjustment to the plan. It was simply the final piece of a sequence that had already clicked into place. The acquisition of Leith Commercial Properties, Garrett Leith's firm, had been finalized 13 months ago by a holding company called Meridian Threshold Group. The principal investor and controlling shareholder of Meridian Threshold Group was a man named Marcus A. Ellington, who had assembled the stake over the course of 8 years using a trust structure that had never appeared in any marital financial disclosure, because it predated the marriage by 14 months. And had been structured by Patricia's firm at the time of formation specifically to remain separate property. Garrett Leith worked for Marcus. He just didn't know it. The 12 lawyers were a condition of the acquisition. They had been standing by for the right moment. The conference room was in a building downtown, a mid-tier glass tower 2 blocks from Patricia's office. Denise had reserved it for what she had told Marcus was a review of the company's finances, a preliminary settlement discussion. She had phrased it in the text she'd sent the morning before. She had used the phrase in good faith. She had expected Marcus to arrive with nothing, or perhaps a single attorney, perhaps some emotion she could redirect and use. She had filed for divorce 9 days prior. She had served him through his office, which Marcus had found instructive as a choice. Marcus arrived 12 minutes early. He took the seat at the head of the table, the chair at the near end, the one facing the door, and set his leather folder on the table in front of him, and poured himself a cup of water from the pitcher, and sat back and waited. The room was quiet. The carpet was the particular gray of offices that wanted to look serious and did not quite manage it. He thought about the oak floors he was installing in the Noda house. He thought about a lot of things. Patricia arrived 2 minutes later with 2 associates who moved without wasted motion and set materials at stations along the table. 9 more attorneys from Meridian's general counsel's office arrived in the following 4 minutes. They filled one side of the table and the seats along the wall, and they spoke to each other in the murmur of people who already knew what was going to happen. One of them set a banker's box on the table with quiet efficiency and left his hands on it for a moment, and then stepped back. 12 attorneys in a room Denise had reserved to renegotiate what she believed was her position. Denise arrived with her attorney, a man Marcus had never met, younger than Marcus had expected, a yellow legal pad visible under his arm, and stopped in the doorway. She looked at the room. She processed the attorneys along the wall. She looked at the box. She looked at the end of the table, and she looked at Marcus, who was looking calmly at the water in his cup. She sat down. Her attorney leaned toward her and said something Marcus could not hear. Denise's face was composed in the way it was always composed when she was choosing her version of the room. Marcus recognized the look. He had seen it at dinner parties and at difficult conversations and at 11 years of moments where she had been deciding who to be. He had always noticed. He had never said so. Patricia spoke first. She placed 3 documents on the table and named each one without hurry. The first was the full accounting, 22 months, 61 transfers, $187.00 withdrawn, and confirmed as directed to the personal account of Garrett Leith. The second was the forensic analysis of the marketing firm, including the 4 payments from the LLC and the paper trail that connected every dollar. The third was a copy of the fraudulent beneficiary change to Marcus's $340,000 life insurance policy, alongside a notarized copy of Marcus's authentic signature from a construction contract executed that same week, so that anyone in the room with functioning eyes could place them side by side and understand precisely what had been done. Denise's attorney had stopped making notes and was simply reading. Patricia set one more page on the table, a corporate org chart. A single page, clean lines, unambiguous hierarchy. Marcus watched Denise pick it up. He watched her eyes move across the names. He watched the moment, and it was a specific, identifiable moment. The way a structural failure begins at a specific point before it propagates. He watched the moment she found the name at the top. He watched the understanding arrive in her face and change it. Garrett Leith, Patricia said, in the steady tone of someone presenting a quarterly report, has been employed for the past 13 months by a company whose controlling interest is held in a separate property trust established by Marcus Ellington 14 months prior to their marriage. Every dollar transferred to Garrett Leith's personal account represents a transfer, ultimately, to a vendor operating under the ownership of the very man whose assets she was attempting to transfer to that vendor. She paused to let the room hold that. We will be presenting the full irony to the court if this does not resolve here. Denise set the org chart down. She turned to Marcus for the first time since she had sat down. Her expression had traveled through composed and arrived somewhere that was trying to find its footing. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was carefully measured, the voice she used when she was preparing a pivot. "I think we can talk about this. I think if we, his grandmother's oldest friend, a woman named Claudette, who had driven up from Virginia Beach the night before and who sat against the wall with her arms folded and her face like a river that had been still so long it looked like stone, said, without raising her voice, 'He's not here to talk, baby. He's here to close.'" Denise's attorney put his hand on her arm. She shook it off. It did not change anything. Marcus let the silence sit in the room the way he let things sit when they had said everything they needed to say. He picked up his leather folder and stood. He straightened the badge on his shirt pocket, force of habit, the work badge, the same one he had worn to every job site for 6 years, and he looked at Denise Ellington once. Across 11 years and 12 attorneys and a box of documents that mapped the shape of what she had tried to build against him and why it had not held. "I build things," he said quietly. "I know how every part goes in, and I know exactly when and how it comes apart." He picked up his cup and took a final sip of water and set it back on the table. "You didn't study the blueprints," he nodded once to Patricia. He walked out the door, and he did not look back. The room was silent behind him. He could feel it the way you feel a structure holding its own weight, present, solid, complete. 9 months later, Marcus sat on the new back porch of a house he was rebuilding in Noda, a brick 2-story with tall windows and a backyard that sloped toward a line of sourwood trees. He had purchased it the week after the reckoning with a portion of the recovered marital assets and begun the renovation the following month, doing as much of it himself as time allowed. The kitchen was done. The floors were done, white oak, laid by his own hands over 3 weekends. The back porch was where he sat now, coffee in both hands, watching the morning light arrive in the way that morning light only arrives when someone has set the angles right. He had expanded Meridian's portfolio to include 2 new commercial properties in Charlotte and one in Nashville. The contracts, in total, represented $4.2 million in secured revenue over the next 5 years. He had also started mentoring 3 young tradesmen through the same youth program where he had once met a woman in a green dress. He did not think about that with bitterness. He thought about it the way you think about the work that made you ready for the work that mattered. He had met Celeste Hargrove at his accountant's office 6 months prior. She was a structural engineer who had come in for an unrelated appointment and had asked him, when she saw his blueprints on the table, a very specific question about load tolerances that told him she already knew the answer and was testing whether he did too. They had dinner twice that first week. She asked good questions, and she did not perform for him, and she let him be quiet when he needed to be quiet, and she laughed when something was actually funny. She was on the phone inside now, something about a site inspection, her voice low and certain, the way her voice always was. Denise had settled. Everything Patricia's firm had sought was recovered. The fraudulent insurance change was reversed. The LLC was dissolved under a court order. Denise had relocated to Raleigh and taken a position in administrative coordination for a mid-sized events company, a step down from the brand director title she had held at the time of the filing. She and Garrett Leith had not, as best Marcus's people could determine, maintained contact after the forensic report was entered into the record. Garrett himself had been required to repay through a civil judgment the funds that had passed through his accounts and had surrendered his broker's license pending an ethics review. He had relocated to a smaller city. Her best friend from graduate school had stopped returning her calls in the 3rd month after the reckoning. Her mother had not attended the single post-divorce social event Denise had hosted. Someone from church had mentioned all of this to Marcus at a dinner in the spring. He had listened. He had thanked the person and moved on to the next conversation. He pressed a seedling into the new raised bed he had built along the back fence, tomatoes, the same kind his grandmother had grown, which she always said grew best when you didn't check on them every 5 minutes, but gave them everything they needed before they asked. The morning was warm. The sourwood trees were heavy with their own stillness. He thought about something Vernon had said when Marcus called to tell him how it had ended. Vernon had been quiet for a moment, and then he had said, "You didn't tear it down, son. You just stopped building the wrong thing." He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.